Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We know that navigating the US immigration system can feel overwhelming or daunting, especially for students, professionals, and families trying to plan their future. The goal of today's session is to provide clarity and guidance in an apolitical, supportive space. We'll be hearing from an experienced immigration attorney, Naveen Bhora, who will walk us through the current landscape, common challenges, and practical steps you can take to better understand your options. This conversation is about empowering our community with knowledge, resources, and guidance so you can move forward with confidence. Today, we have Ahmad Mahmood as our host for the evening. Ahmad is based out of New York City and has spent his entire career in the risk management and insurance consulting. He is also a board member at the American Pakistan Foundation. As a guest speaker today, we have Naveen Rahman Bhora, a partner at WR Immigration with over 25 years of experience in corporate immigration. She has a proven track record of designing strategic workforce immigration solutions tailored to complex business needs. Ms. Bora is an active member of the California Bar, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and the International Medical Graduate Task Force. She is also the former treasurer of the Southern California chapter. Welcome, Naveen.
Thank you.
Now I'll hand it over to Ahmad to start us off.
Thank you, Maha, for that kind introduction for both myself and Naveen. And thank you, Naveen, obviously, for taking out the time today. I think this is a topic that's very near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. So why don't we get right into it? So I thought maybe a pretty good place to start off is just a high level overview of some of the key avenues that folks have of coming into America from Pakistan. Like, what are some of the most significant programs out there that they can access? And then we can talk a little bit about what the current landscape looks like for those programs. So maybe that's a good place where we can kick this off.
Perfect. No, thank you so much for having me this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. If we could please share some of the slides I presented, I would just like to go through and talk about some of the basic concepts first, and before we dive into what all of this means. Maya, if you can just go to slide 3, that would be great. Um, Okay, I do need to note a legal disclaimer that this is just for informational purposes. This isn't legal advice. So, if you have specific questions, I really encourage everyone to schedule a consultation with an immigration attorney. Now more than ever, it's really important to engage proper legal counsel with your visa processes. Okay, and then we can move on. This is just some information about our firm. Then we can keep going. Maha, thank you. All right, and then next slide. Perfect. Okay, the following one. So U.S. immigration is a really, really complex system. It's one of the more complicated ones, but I do want to note that worldwide, every country seems to be going towards developing more complex immigration legal systems. So this isn't unique just to the US. The framework of our current US immigration system is actually based in the Immigration Nationality Act, which is now several decades old, and it is antiquated compared to where we are. So it is a broken system. And over the last several decades, the way it's been functioning is through various regulatory changes for each of the agencies on how they enact or actually carry out the different policies for each of the various classifications of the visas. Also, each of the administrations, as they come in, they will often, instead of trying to pass a new immigration, comprehensive immigration reform or new policies for immigration, because it always seems to be dead on arrival with the legislative branch. What the executive branch does is they typically will have these regulatory changes, or they have these executive actions whereby they try and make certain changes. So whenever there's a change in administration, we'll see a lot of executive actions that will happen that can have some extreme consequences on immigration policy. So moving on. All right, so there are several agencies that are involved with immigration. After 9/11, the Legacy Immigration INS, Naturalization Services, broke up into USCIS and ICE, which is the Customs Enforcement, and they fell within the Department of Homeland Security. And then within the Department of Homeland Security, you also have the CBP, which is Customs and Border Protection, and that's the agency that you see when you arrive at a port of entry, such as an airport or a land port of entry. Next slide, please. The other two agencies that are involved in our space is the Department of Labor and the Department of State. The Department of Labor gets involved on very specific visa processes. So if it's a PERM, which is a green card based process, we will be working with the Department of Labor. And then for H-1Bs and for anyone who is an Australian citizen and able to get an E3 visa, they also have a labor condition application that is also a Department of Labor filing. And then there's the State Department. The State Department is the agency that controls all the US consulates worldwide. And the first step of coming to the United States is often getting a visa in your passport, and that can only happen at a US consulate outside the US. Next slide. All right, and now we can dive into the most common work visas, or the visas that we're going to talk about today, which are the students, and then the H-1B, which is the most common work visa. Next slide, please. I did want to note here, I'm throwing in B1, B2 in here because it is the tourist visa or the business visitor visa. I just want to note that most people do come to the United States as a tourist or a business visitor, but you need to be very careful on what you are engaging in on that tourist visa. There are very limited and specific activities that are permissible as a business visitor or as a tourist. So, people who come in on a tourist visa, they don't have work authorization. Some people come in to attend business meetings, which is totally fine. Some people will come in, we see this often with physicians who are hoping to take the USMLE exams and apply for residency. They can come in on that B1, B2 visa to, attend interviews for residency programs. But again, just be very careful on what you're doing while you're on a tourist visa. And then now, Ahmad, we can jump into the students and the J1s as well.
You're muted.
My apologies. I think let's talk about the J1 category in general, but also I think probably what the folks want to hear and talk about most is like, what are some of the key things, key questions or concerns on top of people's minds right now with respects to the J1 visa?
Sure. So the J1 and the F1 are both like student trainee type visas. The J1 is a they have multiple classifications that fall within the J1. The most common are folks who are coming for internships or training purposes. The trainee J1 is limited to 18 months. Physicians will often come on a J1 as the most common visa for graduate medical education, which is residency fellowships. So that's a J1. You'll often see J1s for visiting scholars. And so the J1 is a trainee type visa. The idea of the J1 is supposed to be cultural exchange, right? Where someone is coming to the United States for a certain type of training, and then they're going to go back to their home country with that training. So that's the idea behind the J1. The student visa is the F1. And for F1s, that's done through a university program, or if you're here, at a private high school, for example, you can get an F1 to attend private high school. Both the J1 and the F1, they are what's called duration of status. And so what that means is that most people, when they come to the United States on any kind of temporary visa, which is called a non-immigrant visa, they receive a specific date by which they need to exit, right? It's a date certain period of admission. It's called the I-94, the arrival record number. And people who come on J1s and F1s, they actually don't have a date by which they have to leave. They get what's called duration of status. So as long as you're maintaining your status, you're okay. You're not going to, if you overstay that period, you don't accumulate unlawful presence days. And so a proposed change to Fs and Js is that they're going to no longer have duration of status, and they're going to have a specific date for F1s and J1s, which is 4 years. And so it adds another layer of complexity to a J1 and an F1, where they need to be very careful that they're not overstaying, because if you do overstay your period of admission, then that period of unlawful presence in the United States is, goes to 180 days or more. When you leave the country, you can face a bar from coming back to the United States for 3 years. And then also, if you overstay by a year, then it becomes a 10-year bar. So there are very grave consequences for overstaying an I-94. So
Right.
that is,
And the
yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, just a follow-up question. The idea there is after the 4 years, you have some kind of an employment opportunity already lined up, so you can revisit your status. Is that basically what they're trying to gear towards?
Yeah, I think that's what's happening is that right now with the way the J1s and the student visas are monitored are, it's on the universities that are running the program. And so the university runs and monitors people through a database called CVIS. And so there is a lot of responsibility on the universities to make sure that the students are maintaining status, that they're, if they're in school, that they have that full-time course load. If they're, graduated and working on practical training, that they're actually working in their field. So this way, by having this 4-year expiration, it forces someone to, check back in with immigration really and file an extension. This proposed rule hasn't been implemented yet, so we'll have to see how they're going to actually enforce it once the regulations become final. So that's something in the horizon for students and J1s.
Yeah. And the process itself, and I guess it's more of a personal question, like the process itself starts when you've been actually accepted into a university and you have some kind of an accepted documents that you use as part of your visa application. Is that the first step in this avenue?
Yep. So if you're applying for study, then the process is once you've become admitted into the university, for example, that institution has to issue you a form called an I-20. And once you have that I-20 document, if you're outside the United States, you apply for an F1 visa at a US consulate. If you're in the United States, let's say you're on a dependent visa, your parent is on an H1, you're on an H4, and then you go into university, you can change your status from, to that student status, the F1. Once you have that I-20, you can apply for a change of status within the United States. So there are 2 ways to obtain that. The J1, you actually get a document called the DS-2019 form. It's a State Department form. And that document is also then issued by a private organization that's authorized to run a J1 program. So the first step is getting either an I-20 or a DS-2019. Now, the I-20s and the DS-2019s need to be constantly updated. So you always need to check in and make sure that your DS-2019 is being renewed every year if you're here, for example, for graduate medical education, or if you're here on a student visa, that your I-20s are constantly being updated to reflect your program. You need to make sure you have an updated I-20 when you're traveling. If you're working on any of the CPT, OPT, again, that document needs to constantly update it to reflect your actual employment situation.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think you said this, like the burden is there's a lot of burden on the university to make sure that there are no gaps in this, but there ultimately it is your personal responsibility, I imagine.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Got it. So you spoke a little bit about the 4-year cap that's under review or under proposal right now, and we'll see what happens there. Are there any other changes that have happened over the last year or 2 years, or maybe are being talked about right now that we could see in the future in the US?
So earlier this year, there was overall visa processing had become more difficult, and it happened in several ways. The first was the validity of a visa. So for Pakistani citizens, the actual visa that's issued in your passport depends on a reciprocity schedule between the US and your country. And what we saw, I believe this happened over like a year, maybe 2 years ago, the H-1B visa, for an example, your petition may be for 3 years, which is very standard, but the actual validity of the visa sticker is now 12 months, okay? So whenever you go to get your visa at the consulate, you just need to make sure that you understand what the validity period of that visa is, and also what the validity period of your petition is. And then when you enter the United States, it's okay if your visa expires, which is a travel document, as long as when you admit into the United States, your I-94 is valid for the full time that you think it is, right? So you could still be admitted for 3 years, even though your visa has expired. But then just keep in mind that if you want to travel again, you'll need to make sure that you take the time to get that visa issued before you return. One of the changes that happened very recently this month with the new administration is that the State Department announced that you can only get your visa in your home country. There was this idea of third country visa processing where instead of going back all the way to Pakistan or Australia, wherever, right, if you could go to a US consulate that's closer, like Canada or Mexico, those consulates will often accept an application from a third country national. That is no longer allowed. So just to keep in mind that if your visa's expiring within a year, you have to do a business trip, let's say to Europe, you will need to make sure that you're also taking the time to go back to Pakistan to get that new visa stamp before you return. So there's a lot more planning that's going to have to happen to make sure that your travel documents are always in order. With the J1s, I believe they always got 1 year visas, so people would typically make the time to go home to get a new visa stamp before they're coming in. The consulates now will, they require in-person interviews again. In the past, they were allowing people to do Dropbox renewals, or they would waive the interview requirement. Now the interviews are required again. So overall, I think visa processing is going to take a lot longer because it may take longer to get a visa appointment. There's a lot more vetting that's happening with visa applications. So once you go for your visa interview, they're going to look a lot more closely on your application. Social media is front of mind when you do the DS-160 form, which is the application form to actually secure a visa appointment. You are supposed to list all social media handles, and then they want you to have, for example, your Facebook, your Instagram public. Okay, you can't mark it private because they want to take a look at what you're posting to make sure that nothing is anti-American or critical of the US government. So everyone needs to be very careful on what they're saying.
Got it. And I know there's certain types of visas where there's caps on how many visas they issue every year. Are there caps with respects to these categories as well, the F visas and the J visas?
No, there's no cap for the annual cap for Fs and Js. There was a temporary pause on the issuance in Fs and Js over the summer, as the State Department was like looking at the overall visa process more closely. And so there was a period of time when it was more difficult to obtain a visa appointment, but that's been, that's back on track now.
Got it. So moving onwards, I'm hearing a lot, the process is under scrutiny, need to make sure your documents are accurate, need to make sure all the information is accurate, where somebody such as yourself and your firm can really help, candidates help, go through the process. So just building on that, the students that are actually graduating this year, what is your advice for those students who are on some of these, H1 or F1, J1 or OPT visas? What advice would you give them?
Yeah. So when you're on an F1 visa, you can get work authorization through CPT, which is when you're still and actively in school, engaged in a course, and you're able to work while, as part of that course, you need practical training. And so CPT is for folks who haven't graduated yet. People who are graduating, they should apply for OPT, which is 1 year of work authorization after graduation. And then for people who are graduating from a STEM field, they're then eligible for another 2-year extension. So if it's at all possible to be in a STEM field, that's great, because then you actually get 3 years of work authorization after graduation. But for people who are trying for that STEM OPT, that extension, you do need to make sure that your employer is registered with E-Verify. Not all employers are required to register with E-Verify. So that is, if they're not already registered with E-Verify, they will need to do that before they can support a STEM extension for you. Ahmed, you talked about a cap on visas. So the one big cap is with the H-1B. So the H-1B does have an annual limit. That's 65,000, and with an additional 20,000 for folks who've graduated from U.S. Master's or higher programs. The way the cap works is it's an annual registration that happens in March. And then they randomly select people from that. It's a computer lottery program. If you're selected, then you have the opportunity to file the H-1B petition between April and June, with a start date in October. So for people right now who are on OPT or going to be graduating, it's really important. It's important to get a job, but also to make sure that the employer that you're seeking, they will support you on the H-1B lottery. And so it's really a discussion you should be having with your employer. I would say no later than December, January, so that everything is in place to submit your application for the registration in March. Historically, based on the number of people who participate in that lottery, the chance of being selected in the regular 65,000 lottery is 30%. It's really, the odds are not great. For the ones with the master's degrees, it bumps it up into the 40s, but 40 percentiles. But again, because the odds are not great, you want to try for that lottery every year. And of course, if you're on STEM OPT, you really get 3 chances at that lottery. If you're not selected in the lottery, then people need to think about either going back to school, going for another master's program, for example, or if their employer has an affiliate office abroad, would they consider transferring you abroad for 1 year, and then you can come back on an intercompany transfer visa. So that's something to think about if you're trying to transition from the student visa to the H-1B, which is the most common path. The H-1s, the other potential change to that H-1B lottery under the new administration is they're considering revamping that lottery program so that people who have positions offered with higher salary bands will have an advantage. So as part of the H-1B case, you have to do this labor condition application and show that you're being paid at a certain level, depending on what your occupation is and where you're working. And so the new administration is proposing that instead of it being a blanket lottery for everyone to have people who are being paid at like level 3 or level 4 salaries have have those folks have a better advantage than people getting entry level salaries. And so I think this will hurt people who are just graduated from undergraduate, for example, and this is their first entry level position. I think those people will be affected more with this proposed change.
That's a very interesting change, and I guess it's a thought process there that they want more highly qualified, specialized individuals to get to have a better chance at the lottery. Is that what they are sort of like more experienced individuals?
I think there might be a I don't know. Maybe the thought is that the H-1B people are underpaid, Ahmad, that they're being paid
Yeah.
less than US workers are willing to be paid. And so
Hmm.
they will
Yeah.
entertain H-1Bs only for people who are being paid at a certain amount. I think that's really the logic behind it.
Yeah, and we'll see if it actually pans out. So what I've heard so far, when you're a student, a very close, tight-knit relationship with the university is important. When when you start working, it's very important to have a very nice and strong relationship with your employer to sort of guide you through the next stage of the process. Now let's talk a little bit about like the people who are on work visas and God forbid like they get laid off or something happens with their employment. Like any advice for that population?
Yeah. So there are different rules depending on which visa you're on. If you're on OPT or STEM OPT, you do have certain number of days of unemployment. And with again, whenever there is a change in your employment, you do need to inform your university. So if you're no longer working with your employer, you do need to note that with your university. If you change jobs, right, then you need to also inform the university and they will update your I-20 with your new employer's information. For people on STEM OPT, there is an additional requirement for the employer to complete a form called a 983. And so for someone who's transitioning employment while on STEM OPT, they do need to make sure that their next employer is also E-Verify registered, and then that employer completes that form 983 for them within 10 days of them starting the new job. The students have up to 90 days of unemployment when you're on OPT, and then with STEM OPT, it's a total of 150 days. So you get an additional 60 days on STEM OPT, and then those days are calendar days, right? So holidays and weekends are included in that count. With other people who are on work visas, such as an H-1B, when you have early termination, there is a 60-day grace period, but that grace period does not exceed the petition expiration date. So let's say hypothetically, you're on an H-1B that's valid until November 1st of this year, and your employment ceases today. You will have a grace period, but that grace period will not exceed the petition expiration of November 1 of this year. During your grace period, you can either apply for a change of status, for example, to a tourist visa if you need a little bit more time to pack your bags, or you can apply for a change of employer petition within that grace period.
Very interesting. And I suppose with the changing landscape and new administration, I know in the past, the transitioning from a work visa to PR, permanent residency, has been an avenue that many people have utilized. Is that still a viable option here, or and maybe it is, but it's just gotten more tougher, I suppose, given the current landscape?
Yeah. So the landscape for transitioning to green card to permanent residency has become a lot more arduous over the last several years, and that is due to the annual quota of green card numbers. So we talked about non-immigrant visa quotas. There are actually quotas on immigrant visas as well. And because there are these annual caps based on category and country of birth, it can take a lot longer to complete a green card process. Within employment-based, there are, EB1 is for people of extraordinary ability, outstanding researchers. EB2 are for people who have an advanced degree and have gone through the labor certification process, or have a bachelor's degree and at least 5 years of experience, or they have self-petitioned under a category called a national interest waiver. And so for those folks under the EB2, that category is considered backlogged, which means that you may have a petition that's been approved, but right now the wait to actually proceed and file that second application, it's about now October just released, the visa bulletin released, and it's July 2024. So every fiscal year, which begins in October, there's a whole new batch of immigrant visa numbers. And so typically in October, we see forward movement of green card numbers, but that is one reason that the overall green card process has taken longer, is because the oversubscription of immigrant visa numbers. There's also greater scrutiny on people who file extraordinary ability petitions and national interest waiver petitions because they are discretionary. So we are seeing a higher rate of requests for evidence on those cases. So people who are thinking about filing for, self-petitioning, not waiting for their employer to support them on this process, just keep in mind that you really need to have a very strong case to be successful in this environment.
And is that this is sort of like a sidebar question, but is that gold green card option now available? And what's the how many funds do you need to get into that program?
So the gold card has not been enacted or anything. I think that was just something that's been thrown out. But we don't know. There is EB5, which is you can invest and get a green card through EB5 program. For the EB5, I believe it's 1.2 million is the investment, or 800,000. So certainly you can get a green card through investment as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You get discounts on kids, or it's 1.2 million for each individual?
No, it's for the principal applicant, and then your spouse can be part of that packet, and your children who are under the age of 21.
Got it. So there's some discounts there. It's not 1.2 times 4.
No.
And just I know we're living in an age of social media. There's a lot of content out there. I mean, if you go on YouTube or Google immigration, there's tons of folks talking about it. What are some of the ways people can ensure that they're not falling into disinformation or getting incorrect sources? Sometimes I'll get a question from my parents and I'm like, I don't think that's accurate. So what would be your advice for those folks to make sure that they are actually tapping into the correct avenues if they want to learn about these visas?
So for students, right, the universities typically will have different immigration counsel that they work with and have been vetted. And all of those immigration firms will have newsletters and client alerts, right? We do. You're welcome to sign up for our newsletters. You just go to our website and you sign up. It's free, and you'll get the latest news that way. The universities typically are all part of NAFSA, and they're a reliable source for information. But yes, you're 100% correct. There's a lot of misinformation out there, so you do need to make sure that you are getting the most accurate information, and not just relying on TikTok or Instagram video for it.
Yeah. What would your number one piece of advice right now be to your clients? Like, what is the most critical piece of information they need to know?
So to be very, very self-aware of, compliance, right? So make sure when you're within the United States that you are always carrying copies of your immigration documents, that you are reporting your change of address to immigration. If there's a change in your job, any kind of change in position or work site, all of those need to be updated, and your file needs to be amended to reflect that. And then when you're traveling, always make sure you have the proper documents in place. We talked about visa stamps being shorter duration, so always make sure that your paperwork is in order before you leave. If you're a student, inform the university so they're giving you the right I-20 for travel. Passports, right? People often don't realize their passports are expiring. They come home, they lock it away, and they don't look at it. Your period of admission to the United States can often be truncated if your passport's expiring. And sometimes people don't, they're not very vigilant about checking their arrival record number, and they don't realize that they thought they were being admitted for 3 years, but in fact, they're only admitted for a year because their passport was expiring. And so to be vigilant about checking your I-94 when you arrive, and then making sure that you're always keeping your passport updated. Sometimes we see clients not realizing their passport expired, and it's several months before they go through the process of a passport renewal. So that one is also really important. So again, to have that ownership, like that personal responsibility and ownership on your own file, to understand how long you're admitted, are you doing everything possible to remain compliant. We are seeing people who are going through extension processes, what we think are routine extensions. Historically, in the past, if someone had any kind of criminal arrest, right, and they were fingerprinted, the process, that criminal matter may have been dismissed or reduced or whatever. Like it was not, and it was there wasn't an immigration consequence to that arrest. But now, when you're doing a routine extension, it appears that USCIS is also running that criminal background check as well. And if something shows up, so for example, we had an individual who's been on an H-1B for like 10 years, and we thought it was another routine extension, but he had a reckless driving speeding ticket in Michigan like 12 years ago, right? And it shows up in the system. And so he had to go for fingerprinting, and, again, to just make sure that all your documents are in order. If you did have any kind of criminal matter, that when you're traveling, you are traveling with all your paperwork, so that if it comes up, you're able to explain, what that matter was.
Wow, that's a very interesting story. I know of at least one family who showed up to go back to Pakistan at JFK Airport, and then they realized all of their passports were expired. I hope they're not going to watch this. I'm not going to name names, but that's a true event that actually happened once.
Yeah, everybody does it. They're going on vacation. They don't realize that the child's passport's expiring in 2 months. They're not going to be allowed on that plane, So yeah, always check your documents.
Yeah, very, very sage advice. I think those are sort of the pre-submitted questions. Maha, any other live questions that Naveen can answer?
Yes, thank you so much, Naveen, for all of your guidance and your very thorough explanation of how the immigration system works in the US. I know there are many intricate nuances to all of this, but you explained it so beautifully, and I know a lot of people must have benefited from all of this information. We do have a question in the question bank right now. Can you please cover N400 application and the event news that regarding social media vetting, good moral character, its limitations, its challenges?
Yeah, no, thank you. So naturalization, that's the process where once you've been a permanent resident for 5 years, or permanent resident married to a U.S. citizen, you can apply after 3 years. So naturalization is the path to becoming a citizen. And there are 2 changes that have happened. One is that when you're going for your naturalization interview, we are seeing officers asking applicants about, do they belong to religious institutions? Do they go to church? Right? So they want to hear that somebody is engaged in that way. And if they're not going to, their church or mosque or synagogue, that they are doing other things like volunteer work or charity work. So they want to see that. There's been discussions also about having neighborhood checks. So historically, and this is like predates my my tenure as an immigration attorney, but When somebody applied for naturalization, the at that time, INS could go to your neighborhood and talk to your neighbors to make sure you're a good person. And they are going to, they're talking about how, reintroducing that. Getting, so as part of your naturalization application, not only do you have to show that you're a person of good moral character, meaning you don't have any address, you've been paying your taxes, but they also want to see that you're appreciated in the community. And then the naturalization test is also changing now. They're making it a little bit longer, so the bar is going to be a little bit harder to go through the naturalization test. The test is a test of knowledge of U.S. History and government. It's a civics test. It's not a difficult test. The current test has like 100 questions. You know all the questions. You have to study it. They'll ask you 10. You have to get 6 correct. I believe that's being expanded to like 120 questions that you have to study. And I believe there's like 12. But again, the naturalization test is also being changed.
Thank you, Naveen. I think follow up. Go ahead, Emma.
No, I was just going to say, I think there was another question that just came in.
Yeah. A follow-up from, I think it's the same person regarding good moral character is, if I have volunteer work with my Ivy League university, does that count? I worked on helping local businesses uplift their businesses with help from university courses and professors and have a certificate.
Sure. I mean, I would throw all of that in. This is very new. So honestly, I've never seen someone get denied because they didn't have this. But we're still waiting for the naturalization form instructions to be amended to explain, like, is this something you submit proactively with your naturalization form, or is this something you just bring with you to the interview? But anything to show, that you're engaged in the community like that, I think would be great.
Thank you, Naveen. Another question we have is, which areas of immigration law are the most prone to sudden regulatory change, and how should we prepare for such circumstances?
So what we've seen this year are the work authorizations that were enabled through executive order. So those were all the temporary protective status, like the TPS, the DACA. All of those folks are systematically losing their work authorization. I don't think this community is affected because Pakistan didn't have TPS, but people from Venezuela, Nepal, like those folks, they're suddenly now, losing their work authorization. So where you may have been in lawful status like that, I think that's the most vulnerable population.
Thank you, Naveen. Another question. I was late on tax returns 3 times, but I was owed money. I was able to file the same year. Does that affect interview and GMC?
That's a very specific question. I would have you speak with your immigration attorney for that particular question. But again, if you've paid your taxes, even though they're late, and you don't owe any taxes, you definitely need to bring copies of your tax returns to your interview and show that you've been compliant and you've filed your taxes. Then that should be sufficient if you're not owing any taxes. But even if they're late, like, file them and bring them to the interview.
All right. I think that, okay, now we have one more. How long does from start to end the PERM/LC and then the I-140?
Okay, so that's the perm labor certification, I-140. That's a very long process. So right now, the Department of, and just to back up, this is a 3-step green card process. It's the most common work visa process where the company is testing the labor market, showing that there are no available U.S. workers, and then they file with the Department of Labor. That process with the Department of Labor is at minimum like 2.5 years because you have to get a prevailing wage request determination first for that position, test the labor market over a 60-day period, and then file the labor certification, which right now is about 16 months. So that first step is well over 2 years. And then depending on if you're categorized as EB2 or EB3, the I-140 can go relatively quickly. You can pay for premium processing, but you're not able to file that adjustment of status until your priority date, which is the date you had filed that labor certification, becomes current on the visa bulletin. So the visa bulletin is a monthly publication by the State Department. You need to track the visa bulletin every month to see when your priority date, which is your place in line, becomes current on the visa bulletin. You can change jobs during this process, right? It is a very long process, so oftentimes people will have an immigrant petition approved with employer A, they have another job opportunity, that's fine. Employer B will need to file a new perm-based labor certification for you, but you will keep that original priority date from employer A. So it is something where you have to go through the process again, but you keep your place in line. And then the adjustment of status can be another 6 months, a year, so I'm saying 5 years.
Thank you so much, Naveen. I think those were all the questions we had in the chat. It was lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for all of the informative guidance that you presented to us in the community today. As you've seen, a lot of people have different questions, and this has been beneficial to so many in the community. So thank you for being such a great resource, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.